Yuk, mari kita langsung saja memberi sambutan hangat untuk Miss Emily Choi as Communication Manager Asian Pacific Google Marketing dengan topik Excellent Deck Design. Please welcome Miss Emily Choi as Communication Manager Asian Pacific Google Marketing with the topic Excellent Deck Design. Miss Emily Choi, the floor is
Hi.
yours. Hi.
Hi, thank you so much for having me. Really excited to be here. Just give me a second to present my screen. All right, let me see if this is the right one. Great.
Great.
Oh, can you see my screen okay?
Yes, of course.
Awesome. Great, cool. Well, thank you so much for the introduction. As you mentioned, I'm Emily. Super nice to be here and super excited to meet all of you and to kind of kick off this week of exciting activities to help you along your development journey. So I work in Google APAC marketing as a communications manager. And as part of my job, I make a ton of presentations for internal team building moments like our team all hands, to pitching new project ideas to internal stakeholders, to supporting our chief marketing officer with his keynote presentations externally. And so as part of my job, I make tons of presentations using slides. And along the way, I've picked up some tips and tricks, which I'm really excited to share with you today. Just a quick caveat that these are by no means hard and fast rules, just how I think about creating presentations to land the message more effectively. I'm really hopeful that you can use the chat, participate. Let me know if there are any other ways that you've used slides to kind of help you create your presentation journey. So before I get started, let's talk about today's agenda, which is really going to cover these three things. First, preparation. So understanding why visual communication is important and what it is. We'll go through sort of the 4 ingredients of deck design, which are type, color, shape, and graphics. And then once you've kind of got all of your ingredients put together, we'll talk a little bit about plating or layout and how you can arrange the different ingredients to create complex images, and how you can focus on the importance of building on a grid and having one key message per slide. But before we get into the nitty-gritty of how to do it, let's start with why we make decks and why visual communication is important. And this is really important because presentations or graphics help us communicate complex, abstract ideas in simple and engaging ways. And so while text has a really important place in helping us share ideas, visuals allow us to connect with an audience more quickly and effectively by getting on the same page without being overwhelmed by copy. Our brains see words as tiny pictures, so it takes time for us to go through that translation process, identifying the letters, processing the combination, and then extracting the meaning, which is why studies have actually shown that following directions with illustrations do over 300% better than those following text directions alone. So in order to put that to the test, I've got a little activity to get us warmed up. And I'd like your help to visualize these descriptions of cook time on boiled egg textures. So I'll give you a second to read this. And essentially, I would love your help to know, if I wanted a boiled egg that with this sort of texture, how long should I boil the egg for? If you could add your cook time guesses to the chat, that would be great. Do you think we should boil it for 2 minutes, 4 minutes, 6 minutes, 8 minutes, 10 minutes? Any guesses? Please add it to the chat. I'll give you 30 seconds to do so. 6 minutes, 4 minutes, yep. Probably 6 minutes, 4 minutes. Oh, 5 minutes, right. Someone doesn't think that the answer is there. Yeah, I mean, so I think the point here is that the correct answer is 4 minutes. But from your answers, you'll see that there's no clear clear answer, right? It probably would have been easier if I had shown you a bit of a diagram like this with the image associated with the cook times, so that you could kind of see that correlation much more immediately. And that's why we use visual communication. It allows us to express ideas and get the key message across in a much faster way. And so, the same principle applies when you are creating a presentation. And creating a presentation is really made up of two different components. So first is content design, which is all around having a clear goal for your presentation, a key message and a structure to best deliver that story in a way that connects the dots between what you want to say and what your audience needs to hear. And then graphic design, which is about using visual elements like a color palette, the typeface, the layout, and more to communicate those ideas. And it's this intersection between the two, which is where great decks live. But today we're just going to focus on graphic design. And you might be thinking, okay, is this really relevant to me if it's all about visuals? I'm not a graphic designer, but does it apply? Yes, absolutely. Because graphic design, when used purposefully, can really simplify complex abstract ideas. It can clarify what you mean by minimizing that interpretation gap, and it can fortify your key message and land the point more effectively. But the key word here is really about being purposeful, because being intentional about how you use the elements on a page is super important, right? Because if you don't use your visual communication tools intentionally, it can actually have the opposite effect and distract and muddle the message, right? Just as when you go to eat outside, you wouldn't add a garnish to a plate just because. Everything that you add to a deck should have a purpose. It should make sense with everything else that's on a plate. Because if it doesn't, what you're doing is you're actually creating confusion, right? Just as this comb is on this bread platter, your diner will ask, why is it here? How is it related to everything else that's on a page? And so creating a design system with some rules that are applied consistently can help you use graphic design elements to reinforce rather than distract from your message. And creating these smooth pathways for communication doesn't mean boring, just as graphic design doesn't mean complicated, right? You don't have to be a designer to use basic design elements to your benefit. And the way I do it is I like to think of these elements as eggs, right? So this is the humble egg. It can produce, a myriad of different flavorful experiences with just a couple of modifications. For example, with some oil, you can have it fried or scrambled, and then with some water, poached or boiled. And these are really different textural experiences, but at its core, really just an egg just cooked a little bit differently. Then once you mix it with some other base ingredients, flour, sugar, butter, you open yourself up to a world of endless possibilities. A meringue tastes nothing like a souffle, tastes nothing like a frittata, tastes nothing like an egg tart, right? And so if you've kind of got these elements that you can use and mix together, you can create a lot of different outcomes with just a few modifications. And so for the purposes of understanding graphic design, the context of deck making, the eggs that we're cooking with today are type, color, shape, and graphics. But before you get cooking, you've got to know why you are cooking. Just as before you, create a meal, you need to know, what meal are you making? Are you making breakfast, dinner, breakfast for dinner? You've got to decide why you're making this deck and what the goal is. Then you've got to ask yourself, how is the information going to be consumed, right? Standing on the pavement, at the side of the road, eating something that you bought from a food truck is very different from like a sit-down dining experience. In the same way that if you plan on having your presentation be paired with your voiceover, that's very different from if you want it to be read by the viewer on their own time. And then finally, just like any good restaurant, ask yourself if you can tell a story, right? Is there some sort of flow or thematic through line that connects all of the different things that you want to say? And so if you haven't guessed already, today's presentation is all about eggs. And so once you've decided why you're in the kitchen, where you're eating, and what the theme is, it's time to crack some eggs and get cooking. And so let's start with type. Right? So type is really important because that's how most of our ideas are communicated with words, obviously. But the way that you treat the typography, its readability and therefore its effectiveness, right? So with many words on a page, that's the equivalent of white noise. So if you're presenting, consider that your audience has to both listen to what you're saying and read what's on screen. So if you expect your audience to listen to what you're saying, less is more. Right? Because if you put too much stuff on a page, the reader will tune you out because they'll be spending time reading. Alternatively, you can use the thing on the screen to reinforce the thing that you're saying. And if you've got to put a lot of text, put it in a doc, share it as a pre-read or as a leave behind, right? Then when it comes to using type to, you can also create a bit of an information hierarchy just by using different sizes, right? It tells the viewer what's the most important, the headline, because it's the biggest, and a very simple mnemonic to remember these rules is large and in charge and small and low recall. Most important thing here is just create some sizing rules and then apply them consistently so that whenever your viewer sees this copy in this size, they're kind of remember those rules that you've set up front. Next up is alignment, and alignment plays a really big role in readability. If you've got content that is misaligned, then you're essentially creating visual hurdles for the viewer to consume your content. Slides has some really easy tools to help you create good alignment with your copy. So rather than pressing enter and trying to eyeball where your copy sits in the text box, you can use the middle, top, or bottom align buttons in order to get them all in the same place. Then you can also use left, center, and right align depending on the needs of your slide. So use left align for longer paragraphs, particularly if you're writing in English. Centralized copy should really only be used for shorter text because it's more difficult to find the starting point. And then when it comes to justifying copy, would really dissuade you from using that for your digital assets because it messes with the spacing between words, which again is like this visual interruption, right? It's like a missing step in a brick pavement that you're kind of asking your viewer to leap over. In addition to sizing and alignment, type can also convey personality by using, the font family, right? And so there are 3 types to be aware of. Sans serif scripts are a little bit more traditional. Serif scripts are more traditional. Sans serif scripts are easier to read on screens, and then scripts or decorative fonts should be used sparingly, but they're really great at communicating that personality. And choosing the right font type that represents the personality of your brand is really important because it can completely change the overall feel, right? So this is just one example of how, some of the most famous brands in the world would feel very different if they had used just a different typeface, right? So in summary, you can use type to do three things. You can use it to create meaning. So because we digest the written word and type is the vehicle for communicating the written word, it plays a very important role in helping you communicate your message. The way that you modify type also affects the readability of the content, and essentially you want to minimize those hurdles so that people can focus on the substance of what you're saying versus the misalignment or the different sizing of the copy on the page. You can also use type to organize information by using different sizes to prioritize what is most important and to focus attention. And then finally, you can use it to convey personality. Use different fonts to express different personality. You can also use it to attract the eye, or use different sizings to create dramatic graphic effects. The next egg in our toolbox is color. And when you create a deck, you want to make sure that you're creating a color palette, a selection of colors that you will center your presentation around. And in choosing this color palette, it's always useful to borrow from real world associations, right? So at Google, blue tends to be our default focus color because it's neutral compared to red, yellow, and green, which has a meaning in the real world, right? Red means stop, yellow means ready, and then green means go. So we like to lean into these real world associations of color to reinforce the points that we're trying to make. So in this template, for example, of like what worked and what didn't, we use green to talk about what worked, red for what didn't, and then blue, which is, the important thing that I want you to pay attention to, which is the next step. Color tones and palettes can also convey different feelings, right? A pastel color tone is, much more chill and relaxed versus neons, which are, the extremely bright version of primary and secondary colors, which are really wild and jarring. If you need help creating a color palette, there is this nifty tool called Coolers, which will help you generate a number of different color palettes, so you can see what does or doesn't work. And you can also see what a color scheme might look like for someone who has color blindness. And then once you've decided on your color palette, it's always good to check whether or not your materials are web accessible. So I like to use white on color backgrounds, but it's not always easy to read. So I use this tool, which is called Colorable, to test whether or not my text has high enough contrast against the background so that it's legible for everyone. And then once you've decided on your color palette, now it's about figuring out how to use the color in order to reinforce your message. And the way I like to do this is really to use color as a symbol to build affinity to an idea. By using a single color to establish a relationship with an idea, you kind of remind the person of that idea every time they see that color. And so the way that I tend to do this in my presentations is to establish the relationship between the idea and the color up front by flooding the page with that color. Then when I'm explaining the idea using that same color, so that the next time that the viewer sees this color, they are reminded of that same idea, right? And when you use color selectively, it stands out, allowing you to direct attention to that area. So in this example, we have a timeline, we use a grayscale, and then we use color to really focus attention, right? Another way that you can kind of use gray as sort of your neutrals and color as your focal point is to help organize content, particularly if you have a very long and lengthy document, right? You can kind of create a bit of a nav bar so that the user knows what all of the different sections in the journey are. And then by graying it out, you show them where they are in the journey, right? And so by de-emphasizing everything into gray and only having one live color, you kind of help them, feel a little bit more situated on the path, right? You can use different shades of color to show that ideas are related. So similar shades, similar ideas, and then group different ideas by grouping them based on pretty distinctly different colors, right? And so color, just like type, you can do three things, right? So you can create meaning, create a color palette that will become the theme for your presentation, use color intentionally to build affinity to an idea, and build a relationship between a color and an idea in order for it to become a symbol. Use it to organize information, use it to direct attention as a spotlight, contrasting it against neutrals or by grouping ideas, right? Similar shades, similar ideas, different colors, different ideas. And you can also use it to convey personality, right? So, lean into sort of the color theory feelings or real world meanings that colors have in order to reinforce your point. The third egg in our toolbox is shape. And I like to think that everything in the world can be distilled into a shape, like a simple shape, right? So for example, this image of a big breakfast could be kind of pared down into just triangles and circles, right? And just like colors, certain shapes can convey certain feelings as well. So geometric shapes like triangles or squares convey structure and symmetry, whereas natural or more organic shapes like the wavy line remind us of nature, clouds. Symmetrical shapes are also, because they're more balanced, they feel a little bit more calm, and triangles can convey motion because it has directionality. When it points up, it implies stability because of its strong base. When it's pointed down, it suggests instability. You can use shapes in three ways. So you can use them to symbolize, again, so by building an association between a shape and an idea. You can use it to organize information, contain different ideas, visualize the relationship between different ideas, and you can also pictorialize by using shapes to create your own illustrations. So if we start with symbols, symbols have learned meanings, right? So they don't actually look like a representation of the real thing, which if you see the hot tip below, an icon is a pictorial representation of a real thing. Like that camera icon is what a real life camera looks like, whereas a symbol has learned meaning. And so these are things like the symbol of the heart, it symbolizes love, but love is an abstract concept. Sorry. love is an abstract concept, and the play button also has a learned meaning, and a brand as well is sort of like a symbol, right? And so when you're creating your presentation, you can create your own symbols by kind of assigning a specific shape, an idea. And so if you use that shape consistently throughout the presentation with that idea that you want to communicate, then you build that association and you help that become a symbol. And I've tried to kind of do this throughout this presentation by using this little fire icon as a hot tip throughout this prezo. You can also use shapes to organize information. You can use them as containers for different ideas and to visualize the relationships between ideas, right? And just like type, you can use different sizes in order to communicate an information hierarchy. So if the shapes are the same shape, size, they are sort of balanced and even. You can use different sizing to communicate more or less, and then a different shape that stands out from sort of a similar pattern in order to communicate difference, right? You can also lean into meanings of common diagrams in order to communicate a more complex idea. So a Venn diagram shows two ideas intersecting at a common point. A funnel shows multiple ideas culminating in a peak. A line with multiple shoots suggests a journey with milestones, right? And so one example of how you might use shape in order to contain and organize ideas is with this one pager that we had regarding YouTube consideration. So this 2019 version was nice because there's a clear linear flow on the top that situates the one pager as part of a larger series, but there's a lot of text and it's very difficult to know where to focus. This 2020 version in the middle makes use of boxes to contain specific ideas, right? So one box for third-party proof points, one box for how to influence, one box for case study, but it really does lack white space. And because all of the elements are very close together, it doesn't give you that much breathing room. So how I might change it is, we'll blow up the how-to section and enlarge the icon so that, you can really see what's being communicated and what it's meant to portray. No more box around the subheader because that's related to the steps. Then in order to draw attention to the did you know fun facts, use a bit of a darker color, and then a white box for the case study to show that as a case study, it's also a proof point, but it's separated from the factoids with the light gray line. You can also use it to demonstrate a bit of a process flow, right? So stages of progress, contain stage one within, one box, use lines and, different colors in order to demonstrate, how those ideas branch off into each other. But really the most fun thing that I like about shapes is that you can use them to pictorialize or to create your own illustrations. So I've spent countless hours looking for the right illustration for my presentation. And instead of spending time looking through repositories, you can also use the default shapes within slides to create your own illustrations. And we do this all the time for our internal team meetings. So in this example, everything on this slide is made out of a shape within slides. So this gift box with a baby coming out of it is just made up of these 4 shapes, kind of deconstructed in this way, in the same way that this gift box on the side is also just a couple of shapes paired together to create a little bit of an illustration. When we do this internally, it's always useful to find a graphic that you kind of want to base your illustration off of in order to inspire you. So for example, last year for Halloween, we created this haunted house, right? It's also just good practice to test your skills to see how you might kind of deconstruct an existing image using a couple of base shapes. So this haunted house on the left was our reference, and the haunted house on the right was what we created with shapes within slides. And so this is, if we've kind of outlined all of the different shapes in red here. And you can see it's mostly repetition, just put together in different patterns, deconstructed. And then we kind of use this entire house as a base component in order to build a much larger mansion that then sat at the end of a haunted driveway. Where we put our agenda. So yeah, so that is shapes. And just like our first 2 eggs, you can do these 3 things. You can use shapes to create meaning, create your own illustrations in order to visualize the thing that you want to talk about. You can also create symbols by developing an association between a shape and an idea by using it consistently and repetitively. You can use it to organize information containing different ideas and then visualizing the relationships between them, and then to convey personality, right? So by leaning into existing feelings that different shapes convey, like rounded organic shapes are a little bit more friendly, approachable, natural, geometric hard shapes are more serious, stable, structured. The last egg within our toolkit are graphics, and there are really 3 types. So there are statics, right? So these are photos, illustrations, or icons. They're GIFs, which are moving, repeated animations and videos. And you can use graphics to visualize ideas, create metaphors, or show real examples to prove your point. And so when it comes to finding graphics, there are a couple of tips and tricks that you can use to find the right image that you want to use, and starting obviously from Google. So Google Images has tons of images for you to explore and use, and some nifty tricks within the search settings can help you find what you're looking for a little bit more quickly. So for example, within the search bar, you can click color and select transparent to find PNGs that have transparent backgrounds so that you can layer the images on top of each other. You can also click type to find GIFs directly within search. And then, of course, if you can't find what you're looking for within Google, there are also a number of repositories that you can make use of. Unsplash is a royalty-free stock photo library that has a lot of great images that you can use in your presentations. And of course, Giphy is another go-to for us to find these repeated animations. But what I find people tend to overlook is actually the stickers tab, which is a GIF with a transparent background that will allow you to kind of use movement on a page in order to draw attention to what you want to focus on. Then another way that you can find little icons to use is within Slides itself. You can access a large library of ready-made illustrations by using the auto draw function. So I'm actually going to escape my presentation mode and show you what this looks like. So if you go click shape, click auto draw, and then let's say I wanted to replace this cursor of a hand with a yellow hand illustration, I can just use my mouse, create a little scribble, and then auto draw using the power of machine learning will bring up a library of icons that I can pick from. I'll pick a hand here, and then you can change the border color, the outline, and the fill color so that you can replace your little cursor here with an icon of your choice directly within Slides. Then when it comes to deciding on which image or visual to use, I've always found that it's best to show the real thing, particularly for this group. Nothing is more compelling than showing the app or the game itself, right? So we do this all the time for keynote presentations that our Chief Marketing Officer does. So in this example, we wanted to talk about this Google Lens feature at a conference in India. And rather than using sort of a generic off-the-rack asset, we decided to take a screen recording of Google Lens in action. And what's really nice about that is it allows the speaker to tell a personal story about using the product themselves. And it really kind of puts this adage of an image is worth 1,000 words into practice. Right? This is especially true when it comes to presentation that you're speaking over to allow the graphics to speak on your behalf, right? So oftentimes we'll see, lots of text on a page and then very small graphics on the side. But if you've got a beautiful graphic that kind of lands the point for you, allow the graphic to speak on your behalf, right? So you might do something like this instead. And the beauty of this is it allows the viewer to really become immersed in the image that you're showing. once you've chosen your images, you might want to modify sort of the default shape that it comes in, and you can do that by masking the image. So in this example, again, I'm going to escape and show you how you can do this. So I'm sure all of you are familiar with crop, but sometimes what gets overlooked is the ability to mask the image to a different shape. And so let's say I wanted to turn this middle image into an oval. You can click this little arrow next to the crop icon and then click the shape that you want and then adjust it. So this little toggle will allow you to create more dramatic effects around your image. You can also, within slides, recolor icons. So let's say I have this PNG icon of a rooster, but I would really like it to be a different color or a different silhouette. So you can go to Format Options, go to Recolor, and then click the color that you'd like to use. So let's say I want to have, a white silhouette of this rooster. Click, the closest variant, and then just adjust the brightness, and then there you go. You've turned your colorful multicolor icon into a silhouette just within slides. No Photoshop required. You can also do some low-tech photoshopping within slides. So in this example, I actually don't have enough background to flood the page. And so what you can do with certain photos is you can kind of fake it. So this is the original image. As you can see, it doesn't bleed all the way into the background. And the way that you do this is you just make a copy of the image, and then you crop it to the very edge, and then you just pull it until you kind of can't see the seam. Ooh, you can still see the seam. You can't see the seam anymore. And then you just do the same thing on the other side. Crop it. Usually it helps to crop it quite thin and then pull it until you can't see the seam. And so, well, you can kind of see it here still. But if that happens, another trick that you can do is just put a slightly transparent overlay and no one will know. So transparent, create a semi-transparent overlay, and then most people won't even be able to notice that unless they're looking very, very closely. So yeah, just like our first 3 eggs, you can use graphics to do these 3 things. So create meaning, visualize an idea through illustrations, pictorial representations. You can also use images as a metaphor. For me, obviously, I'm using eggs as a metaphor for graphic design elements, and also to show real examples of the thing that you're talking about. You can use graphics to organize information, break up the monotony of text by drawing attention to something different on a page, or using GIFs or animated elements to add movement to a static screen, or to immerse the viewer in the thing that you're talking about. And then finally, to convey personality, right? So to use emojis, memes, GIFs to add a little bit of levity to a serious presentation. So these are eggs, and these are the 4 eggs in our graphic design toolbox. And you can modify them in order to do these 3 things: create meaning, organize information, and offer personality. So before we head into plating or layout, I'm going to pause here and just see if anyone has any questions so far. Let me know in the chat, or feel free to unmute. And thanks, Fard, for the time check. Any questions? Any thoughts?
Silahkan yang mau bertanya. Jika mau bertanya, boleh.
Cool. All right. If not, let's go ahead to plating. So, once you've got your eggs, you've cooked them, that's great. But like any foodie knows, the way that the ingredients are arranged on a plate can have an outsized impact on how delicious the food tastes. This is a very different experience from this. So, the first thing to start with is layering, which is the vertical order in which the elements are placed, what sits on top, what's in the back. And by using different layers, you can create complex scenes that give the illusion of depth. Again, no need to use Photoshop. You can do all of these things just within slides. So in this example, this was a cover page that we used for one of our internal town halls. And this slide is made up of 3 different layers, right? So on the bottom, we've got the actual slide, right? Then we've got a background, which has like the little clouds. And then we've got the hot air balloon people in the middle, and then a moving transparent GIF of clouds moving across the page sitting on the very top. You can also use layers again to draw attention to the most important thing on the page that you want people to pay attention to as a bit of a spotlight, right? So in this example, there's a transparent gray layer that's behind the box that says, reason number 1, and it's graying everything else behind it so that the content on the left looks brighter and you're kind of focusing on it, but it's still situating it within the broader context of, how do we know it's working? Then when you move to the next item in the flow, you just switch that around, and now you put reason number 1 behind this transparent layer, and you bring reason number 2 to the fore. Again, still situating it within the broader context, but now focusing attention on the second element, right? In addition to layers, the second most important thing when it comes to plating is really about building on a grid. You've got to think about how all of the different items fit on the plate together, which is the layout. And the most important piece of that, especially with presentations, is around building on this grid. Because even spacing helps with comprehension in the same way that alignment and how we talked about those visual hurdles when you have misaligned content will actually distract from the message that you're trying to communicate. And so to help you build on a grid, there are several tools within slides that can help you do this without eyeballing it. So the first one, again, I'm going to exit so that you can see what I'm talking about. The first one is to use grids, to use guides. So if you go to View, go to Guides, and then click Show Guides, you can actually drag and create guides to create sort of markers within a slide to help you organize your content, right? And so once you've got these guides in place, then you can move the elements around based on the template that you have set using your guides. So in this example, if I wanted to move these tiles back, I would just use these guides here and move all of the different squares back in place because I have used guides to create my template beforehand. And there you go. Another way to do this is actually to use the align and distribute function. So let's just turn off guides here so that you can see this. And so what you can do is, let's say I want all of the letters within build to be aligned. Instead of trying to eyeball them one by one, waiting till this red line appears in order to tell me whether or not they are center aligned, I can select everything, click Arrange, Align, click Middle, and there you go. Everything will be center aligned. But you'll see that the elements are not evenly distributed. The gaps between each of the tiles is uneven. And so again, you can go to Arrange, Distribute horizontally in order to even that spacing. And so, yep, so that is what this is about. So in order to adjust object spacing, you can align them to the top, to the middle, to the bottom, and then distribute them. And you can do the same thing within a table as well. If you have sort of uneven row heights or column widths, you can use this distribute function in order to create that order. Another thing to be aware of is padding. So every text box and every element within a slide with copy within it comes with a margin around the text. And in order to, say, centralize the copy, so for example, oftentimes we'll have numbers where we want to have the numbers centered within a circle, right? You know, despite the fact that, you know, I've kind of moved everything to the middle, there's clearly still, you know, a larger gap to the left versus to the right. And the reason for that is because there is padding. And so the way that you can adjust this is by going into format options, going into text fitting, and you'll see padding. So everything comes with sort of this default 0.1 inch padding all around. And if you just reduce that padding, right, then you will get your numbers perfectly centered within the circle. This is also why sometimes you'll have a table like this that just doesn't fit within the slide, even though, you know, no matter how many times you try and reduce the size of the table. And so what you can do if you wanted to get this table to fit within the slide is actually to reduce the padding around each of the cells. So as you'll see again here, the table comes with a padding of 0.1 inches. And if you just reduce that to, let's say, 0.05 all around, and there you go, you've got the same amount of content in a much smaller table that now fits nicely within your slide. So if we were to apply some of these principles to an example, you know, here is a slide, you know, that we got from an internal presentation that I might adjust, applying some of these principles around building on a grid. So you'll see, for example, you know, there's clearly a row around customer need, around goal, around bidding strategy, around complexity, but it's not very aligned, right? So the top of install volume, customer need is clearly higher than I need customers that'll install and ideally sign up. And so how you might change this is actually to build everything on a grid and make sure that all of the different rows are aligned so that your eye can look at everything in one go without any interruptions. And then you might also use color in order to demonstrate the relationship between each of the different columns categories, right? So all of the icons and the copy within, you know, this column are associated to each other, and then it gets progressively more complex. So if you, and you know, the reason why the original was perhaps a little bit more complicated to read was because if you look at how all of the different elements were organized within the slide, it really wasn't built on a grid, as you'll see here. And so just by simplifying it slightly, putting everything within a table and building it on a grid, you are able to communicate, you know, the same information just with a couple fewer visual hurdles. And so once you've decided on your theme and a couple of templates and color palette and all of that good stuff, it's good to lock it in and build a theme within slides. And you can do that by creating layout templates and also by changing the color palette. And you can, you know, once you've created a slide with this theme that you like, you can actually import it into future templates by clicking slide, change theme, import theme, and then selecting this presentation. Then the last thing that I'm going to leave you with before we do a bit of an exercise to try and put these principles into practice is that it's really important to try, especially when you're doing a presentation, to have one slide with one message, right? Sometimes we put constraints on ourselves saying like, you know, a deck can only be 10 slides, but if the 10 slides are filled with tons and tons of copy, you're probably better off adding a couple more to let your message breathe. So my deck, for example, is over 100 slides long, but I'm clicking through them really quickly because I know that some of these slides really only require 5 seconds. And that's because most of the content is meant to be presented. Whereas if it was meant to be read or consumed on your own time, I would definitely condense and shorten because, you know, 100 slides to read through on your own time can be extremely intimidating. And so with that, I've created, a bit of a dummy example of a slide that we see often, and I would love your help to figure out how we can apply some of the principles that we spoke about today in order to improve the comprehension of this slide. So we've created a Jamboard, which we'll put the link in the chat, but it's also here. If you could head to the Jamboard and just using the sticky note function or the pen tool or the text function to circle things that are wrong with this slide, how would you improve it? That would be really great. So let me put the link into here as well. Oh, great. Thank you so much. All right, and then I'm going to switch to the Jamboard so that we can see what everyone is putting into. So feel free to, you can use this little pen tool or these sticky notes and write what could be improved, what's wrong with this slide, how would you change it based on what we talked about today, type, color, shapes, graphics, building on a grid, one slide, one message, how would you change it? Putri, this is a really great question about getting folks hooked at the start, and I will answer it after we finish this exercise. Add white space. Yeah, absolutely. It is very cramped. There's clearly a lot going on here. There's more that folks want to add or communicate. Font to be consistent. Absolutely, yeah. So you'll see, this is these important stats are completely different font from the rest of the presentation. Actually, this is also perhaps a different font. Too much information. Yep, that's right. This slide is working really, really hard. There's a lot of content that the person is trying to communicate on one slide alone. What else? Use of pie chart. Yeah, tell me more. As in, should they be using a pie chart? Is it, this screenshot is interesting, should be bigger. Yep, absolutely. It's also a question of, what is it associated to? It's great to show the real example of the thing that you're talking about, but how does it relate to the other information on the page? And it's pretty small, right? Like even with the spaghetti carbonara description, it's quite difficult to read. So it feels a little bit like it's there to kind of fill the white space, but not very clear how it's associated to, everything else on the page. Yeah, so the pie chart and the charts in general, actually, very good point, right? Even all of these labels are extremely small. So what exactly is the chart meant to communicate? It's great that there's a visual, but because just of the size of it, it's very difficult to understand what exactly you're supposed to be looking at. Grouping. Eyes fail to find where to start and what correlates with what. Yeah, that's absolutely right. It seems like there are 3 headers, but then when your eye kind of follows this column, here, let me use this laser tool. When you follow this column line, it cuts in between some of the images. So, you could guess that perhaps this is one category of content, but not entirely sure. These are all really great points. So I'm going to head back to my main presentation, and I will kind of expound on many of the things that all of you have already pointed out. Yes, so starting with white space and margins. The margins are very uneven, and so that is what is making you kind of feel cramped or, feels like it's just not very organized. Then the second piece is around alignment and sizing of the pillars, right? So the three different pillars, that are related to the 3 different takeaways are not evenly sized. The content is not organized based on the 3 heading pillars, right? So again, we talked a little bit about this screenshot of the apps, right? It doesn't fit within either category nicely. The header is not aligned to the left pillar, and the header box here, there's just absolutely no breathing space, right? It's literally edge to edge, which makes you feel quite constrained. Then, we see the same issues when it comes to the sub-elements within each of the pillars, right? So there's a massive margin between the header of the first pillar and the pie chart, right? The 2 important stats are not aligned. It's a small misalignment, but even these small things, your brain is kind of wired to look for anomalies, and these little anomalies create those visual hurdles that are preventing people from focusing on the substance of the content and focusing on these misaligned items. Then in terms of type, someone said inconsistent font usage. Absolutely, there are 3 different fonts here, and the sizing is also inconsistent, right? So here is one example of a minute, just 1 point difference, but again, because our brain is wired to look for these anomalies, it feels uncomfortable and it feels like there's something wrong here, right? So ideally, we would choose one sizing system and then apply it consistently across the slide, and choose one font to represent a header, one font to represent your body copy, and then apply it consistently. And then similarly down here, you've got this entire chunk in bold, and you've also got copy that's justified, which is messing with the spacing between the words and just making it very difficult to read. There's also inconsistent color usage, right? So there are many colors on the pie chart, a subcolor here that presumably is talking about the pie chart, but it's not associated to the color in the headline. So again, kind of color used to focus attention, but not used consistently as a symbol to create an association with an idea. There's very little use of shapes, right? The only shapes used are to contain the different headers, but you might want to use shapes, again, to draw associations between different elements, to highlight important points within, say, the graphics. And then again, what do these graphics show? Like not entirely clear what the relationship is between the elements on the page. And so with all of that in mind, so how I might change it, especially if this was meant to be presented, is I would actually split this one slide into 4. So I would start with one slide focused on the first takeaway, using this blue color in order to land this point about the first takeaway, blowing up the chart so that you can see all of the labels very clearly, and then coloring, the reason headlines in the same color, followed by the description copy in a neutral, the gray. Then, again, using color in the same way, the second takeaway, fully focus on just this red, using, these boxes to reinforce the association between red and the second takeaway, blowing up the charts again so that you can really see what's going on, and then making sure that the subcopy beneath it very clearly explains what is being seen in the chart. And then finally, the third takeaway here, right? So we talked about these graphic images. So what exactly in the image do you want people to focus on? So use these little arrows to draw attention, and then use the subheaders in order to explain, and then use color within the chart in order to highlight the most important point that is then associated to the takeaway that you land with your audience. And so once you've kind of done these 3 deep dives, then you can do a simpler recap of the 3 takeaways by just pulling out highlights from the 3 previous deep dives and creating a much more minimal approach that isn't so detailed, but all of the detail sits on other slides that the viewer can go look at a different time. And the most important thing, of course, is that everything is built on a grid. And so that is it. I'll leave you with a bunch of resources to help you find, icons, illustrations, photos, and whatnot to help build your slides. And then just to recap, today we started off by talking about preparation. So what is visual communication and why does it matter? So just remember, before you create any presentation, make sure that you know why you're making it, for who, how it's going to be consumed, and then look for a way to tell a story. Then when it comes to actually building your presentation, once you've got the content design locked and loaded, use these elements, right? Type, color, shape, and graphics in order to, create meaning, organize information, and convey the personality of your brand. And then finally, once you've got all of these ingredients in place, make sure that you are putting it all together, build on a grid, lock it in with a theme, and remember, one slide, one message. And that is it. That is my Eggcellent deck design presentation. And I will head to the chat for any questions. All right, I'm going to answer your question, Putri, on how do you get your audience hooked on your presentation right from the very start. So I think it really depends, again, on the goals of your presentation, but particularly in a virtual environment, finding a way to engage your audience at the start with some sort of interactive exercise or thought starter is always helpful. I always think it's also helpful if you have a very clear theme throughout that can or metaphor that you can situate your viewer in as well. So, interactive tools, like, if you did a poll or asked a question or, used a metaphor or started with a story, something to kind of appeal to the more emotional side of your audience is, I find, always pretty effective. Any other questions or thoughts? Also, Putri, let me know if I didn't answer your question, if you're looking for more specific tactics. Also, feel free to send me any questions post-session as well. I know sometimes, these things are most useful when you're in the situation, and you've got to create like a pitch deck or something like that. And that's only, when this stuff becomes quite tangible. So really happy to help workshop any questions you might have moving forward. Yeah. Also, let me know if, y'all don't like eggs as well. That's totally fine too, but,
I love egg.
Yeah, me too. I think they make everything taste good, right? Yeah.
Yeah, egg is everything. Okay, who loves egg? No, I mean, on to us.
All right. Well, no worries. Thank you so much for having me. Please let me know if there, as you collect tips and tricks on your journey, and good luck with the next 3 days. I think you've got, a really exciting agenda ahead of you. Really grateful for your time and, for the opportunity to come and share, and best of luck with the next couple of days as you embark on this workshop.
Great.
All right, I will pass it back to you.
Okay.
See you later. Bye.
See you later. Bye. All right. Thank you, Miss Emily Choi, for taking your easy time to sharing knowledge and insight with us. That's really awesome. Thank you so much. Ya, terima kasih buat Miss Choi untuk sharing bermanfaatnya hari ini. Semoga bagi kalian yang bikin deck next time bisa lebih rapi dan enak dilihat seperti itu.